It's a great way to start a stream.
Yeah, well, we're live. Hey, I'm Bacon. We're going to talk about myth. We're going to talk about role-playing games as a modern myth. Hey, Andrew. We're going to talk about probably Shaman a little bit. Game Masters as Shaman. And the reason is because after the holiday, I sort of, began speaking with everyone who's here. Let's do introductions first. What am I even doing? So, TPR, Jax, Ben, regulars, well loved, and TPR has a channel that he's working on getting content out for. Jax is a very, I'll say, a long-suffering friend of mine. Ben is a brand new friend, but we have a lot in common. And so, Jax, you came on to discuss role-playing first, I think. You were the first of the group.
I think so, yeah. You might have had Sable before me.
I think I had you first, actually. I think I had.
Yeah, I think so.
And then I brought Sable on. And then you brought Ben on, Jax.
Yes,
I
did.
Connected us, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the sequence of events.
Yeah, Jax is a PhD in film. Ben is looking to become a PhD in. I don't even know what you would call that. What's the technical?
Game studies, I guess.
Oh, just game studies. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I think so. I don't know how to give people anxiety the fun way, I guess.
Now, just out of curiosity, does the game studies, is that specifically digital, or does that include just game theory?
It can be anything games related.
Okay. All right. Nice. Okay. Cool.
I think usually it's sound log.
Oh man. Okay. When I finish, Bacon's been helping me really kind of nail down this model that I have for RPG the game loop of RPGs and how it's different than the regular game loop. And so we'll have to connect and talk about that once I have something solid to talk about too.
No, it is forbidden.
Oh well, okay. Bacon has declared.
I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't mean to talk over that.
Anyway, that was just an aside.
I interrupted you. Don't try and out-British me here.
I would never try to out-British you. I don't even know what did you call him? Carriage? Was it a carriage? I don't even know what a carriage is.
In what context?
In the British context. It's a bus, apparently. I think it was carriage, right?
Coach. Bus.
Coach.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. See, I don't even know what the right word is.
Oh, it's like a carriage is a thing of a horse.
Yeah.
Or
So is a
or
coach.
train, I guess.
Yeah, so is a coach. That's true.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm the worst.
Let's fight. Let's fight about it, Ben.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess. So before we start, then we have to make sure that we define what we mean when we say.
This is the content people are here for, is deciding the difference between the antiquated carriage and coach.
Yes. The linguistic war
horse-drawn.
across the pond, for sure.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Or a typewriter.
Or a typewriter. That's true.
You're playing carriage or coach.
Right. So just to jump into it, the reason that we're even here is that I think when we were talking about reconvening everyone back together, because I've had you each on sort of independently of one another since the holidays ended. We talked about reconvening. This was a topic that came up. I think it's a really of course, I think it's a good one, but I think it's a good one to sort of get everyone's thoughts together on, because you're all coming from different perspectives, right? So I have my perspective that is stated on the channel. Not completely yet, but whatever, we'll get there. I keep saying that and keep not producing videos in the series, but we'll see. And then Jax, you come from film, and Ben, you come from specifically games, which which is good. And then TPR, you sort of have an eclectic view, I would think.
Yeah, I do come from a an animation background. I think I've mentioned a couple of times in different streams. I have a bachelor's in. I know, right?
No, you've named it like you've mentioned it twice, I think.
I think maybe. I have a bachelor's in computer animation. I've studied it. Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about this, I think, once before. So that includes film history, color theory, all sorts of stuff like that. Shot composition, blah, blah, blah. And then just playing games for my whole life.
A million billion years.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have begun the series on this channel to discuss, because I had this brilliant idea to assert that tabletop role-playing games are a modern kind of myth. And I've laid it out in the videos because there is it's essentially, I'm going to call the game master a shaman. So to be specific, the game master is not a shaman. Okay. They are a shaman parallel. They are a secular shaman parallel in the modern era as opposed to antiquity. So I want to be very clear about that, because it seems like every time I make this statement, I use the shorthand and say game masters are shaman, but that seems to tend to cause confusion. I get questions about, are game masters responsible for your spiritual well-being? Should they be concerned with these other things? So no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying their role imitates the role of the shaman in antiquity at the table in a secular setting. They are not your psychologists. They are not your spiritual leaders. Do not go to them for those things. Unless they are your psychologists and spiritual leaders, but that's a different conversation. So
don't mix pleasure with pleasure.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that I asserted it is because I do weird things in my downtime. And so I was just kind of flipping through different game theory books or whatever I was doing. And it just struck me. It was like, hey, this is probably a case that I can make. Let me try to make the case. So I have been going through Jung. I can't say I've gone through Jung because there's 12,000 pages of it. I've gone through von Franz. I've gone through Eliade. I've gone through Hillman. I've gone through a bunch of different, a bunch of people from the Jungian tradition in order to make this case with support, because I don't want to just assert, hey, kind of looks like it. I want to say, hey, it kind of looks like it. And also, here's where the literature agrees with me. And so I took the Jungian myth and even the Campbellian myth a little bit, because that is important. And I've put that together with, the Jungian staples of collective unconscious and archetypes and the liminal space and shaman and individuation. And now I'm kind of edging in toward active imagination, which is less mythic. It's on the downside of I'll call it the downside. That's not derogatory, but it's on the downside of Jungian thought. It's not as highfalutin, I guess, as myth and mythic consideration. But
like more modern and practical then?
It's more practical, it's more personal, and
right.
it's more because it tends to actually be hyper personal. Because it's hyper personal, it tends to deal with the individual's interpretations of archetypes and not the collective unconscious archetype. And as a result, it tends to be it's meaningful and not detracting from it. It's just less it has less mythic resonance than
less universally applicable kind of a thing.
Yes, yeah, it's more personal.
Gotcha.
It's just less universally applicable. Like you may have. So within the context of myth, there's the collective unconscious, which is boundaryless. It crosses cultures. It crosses individuals. It crosses
time
ideas.
And space.
Then you have your cultural interpretations of those archetypes. So while something like Nosferatu might be mythical because the archetypes can apply throughout time and throughout space and throughout culture, depending on, what is a concern of the zeitgeist of any given day in which it's re-released or remade. Like, for example, Nosferatu was just released over Christmas, and that particular vampire usually represents shadow, darkness, death, and specifically plague. And so we just have been through the global pandemic, and in the context of the world, this sort of thing can be applied and reapplied and reapplied and reapplied. So that would be an example of a myth, whereas a more culturally relevant story would probably actually be Dracula, just to kind of keep it in that same genre, because Dracula is it's a very local, it's very culturally relevant. It's Victorian Gothic storytelling, and so it's kind of locked in time, and it's locked to specific characters' concerns, and so that localizes it a bit more. And I'm likely not doing the best job of explaining this. It'd probably do me well to sit down and actually write an essay about it and relate it that way. But then there's more personal interpretations of archetypes where, your everyman could be your dad who gets in a suit every day and goes to work and comes home and is just kind of, trying to, and that would be a much more personal idea of what that archetype is. Still hits all of the beats of the archetype, but is a much more personal, extremely local version of the broader application or the broader extrapolation of the particular archetype. So my argument is that tabletop role-playing games are a modern type of myth because they tend to hit all of these mythic, I'll call them requirements, but it's not unerringly, right? So you can have a mythic game, or you can have mythic situations within an extremely not mythic game. But I think that certain types of games can achieve that mythic resonance, that upper level of mythic resonance. And so I just kind of set about reading and figuring out how the different things can be supported. I took it from a bottom-up view, right? So I started at young, and I started with all the different readings, and I wasn't trying to, hammer specific perspectives into the tabletop role-playing so to like force things to fit. I took it for what it was worth and saw, hey, maybe it fits, maybe it doesn't. And there are a wide variety of things that do not fit. But I think enough fits that the case can be made. So, provided that I've done all that, I was curious as far as like what your three opinions of the project is. Is Young a bunch of crap? Do you not agree with it? Are there different perspectives on myth that you have? Do you think that it's a worthwhile comparison? Why is it worthwhile? Why does it matter? Like, of course, I have all my opinions on all of this. I have answers to all these questions. But I just thought maybe it would be an interesting conversation to sit down and hash it out and see whether or not you think I'm a complete jackass.
Well, I mean, that's totally separate from the subject we're talking about, right?
The answer is yes, you are a jackass, but let's also talk about myth.
Exactly.
Define jackass.
It's a very funny comment, Ben.
Oh, you're welcome. I thought it was rather humorous too.
It was.
Yes, in good humor today.
Actually, specifically about a definition, though, can you define what you mean, Bacon, by mythic resonance specifically?
It is, yeah, but you're going to have to give me a minute. So hold on.
Sure.
Cool. I would agree. I was going to ask just mythic. So I think probably both or the same answer?
Well, yeah, I definitely want to get into a definition of myth and what it actually is too. But
well, not just myth, but mythic, right? Like
sure,
yeah.
You could make a differentiation between those, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Well, like while he's looking, this gets into like so my background is like poetic versus poetry, right? Like so there's like there's things that remind us of, and there is the thing.
Okay, yeah, right. I see what you're saying. That makes that might actually start getting into the idea of mythic resonance in and of itself too.
Yeah, I'm basically saying I agree with your question.
Okay.
And I'm also interested, but it's there's mythic resonance is potentially another layer.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Okay. We're on the same wavelength. Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. I found my notes. Sorry that I'm entirely unprepared for that question. What an idiot. So I have it here. Luckily, I make my notes searchable, or at least I use keywords to make it so it's easier to find them. So what I have here is that mythic resonance refers to the psychological and emotional impact that mythic symbols, stories, and archetypes evoke within the human psyche. It describes how mythic themes rooted in the collective unconscious resonate across cultures and individuals. So it's across cultures and individuals, not in cultures and individuals, evoking a sense of timeless truth, shared human experience, and meaning. From a Jungian perspective, it occurs because myths reflect archetypal patterns, which are universal psychic structures, dreams, ancient stories, cultural narratives, et cetera, in narrative and storytelling, it's achieved by drawing on those themes. And then I also have here in tabletop role-playing games or fantasy settings, mythic resonance can be deliberately invoked by incorporating the symbolic elements and archetypal figures intentionally. I may have already said intentionally, but so those are my notes on the topic. So I also have, for instance, here like a mysterious all-seeing oracle is a mythic figure of the seer. You can evoke mythic themes like slaying a dragon. The dragon can represent a greater evil depending on how it's terrorizing the countryside, if it's terrorizing the countryside. So you can, with intent, draw on these. And I know that will certainly, at least from a Jungian perspective, kind of infringe on the mythicness of it, but I'll just put it, you asked the question, asked and answered. So there's that.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Shark, thanks for showing up.
So it sounds like, if I'm understanding what you're saying, that a sense of mythic resonance can be invoked by employing archetypes. And that's actually a separate thing from treating the RPG in and of itself as a myth per se, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes,
I'm tracking.
So, and I think that this is important to discuss because throughout what I have published, I'm constantly bringing up things like tune or paranoia and mentioning how, or even just the tone of a game that is otherwise set outside of paranoia or tune. So a humorous style fantasy game, like a murder hobo game in cyberpunk. So there are, not every type of game is going to achieve mythic resonance. It's gonna kind of exist on a sliding scale, right? And it's going to depend on the collective unconscious, the evocation or employment of these specific themes or the specific archetypes, et cetera, et cetera. Now there are going to be mainstays that you can't escape, like the GM. And I in fact, and this is something, Jax, that you brought to my attention, I think that the parallels I draw between a GM and the shaman is probably the strongest part of the series so far. It's where I use the most support. It's where I'm able to draw the most clear parallels. But again, there are some very significant, distinct differences between the two. I don't think that hurts my case. I think that acknowledging them is important, but I think that enough is there to say that they are a secular analog as opposed to an actually genuine shaman, spiritual leader, et cetera, because they are not that.
Got a lot to say here, but I'm going to hold off until we get...
No, you go ahead unless Ben has, because I'm formulating. So
I mean, yeah, it is, right? Because we use like heroic archetypes when it comes to making characters, right? We take a lot from storytelling, and we take a lot from you want to be a heroic knight, or you want to because a lot of role playing is fantasy, right? You get to partake in stuff that you might not actually be able to do. You get to be part of a story, right? And usually, a lot of games have an epic campaign, right? I mean, like, even the word epic, it's like, it's an epic, it's a saga, it's this giant narrative of mythological feats that you get to partake in. And even like the act of, if you prescribe to the magic circle, or if you don't, there is at least some kind of, when you role play, you do kind of step into something, right? You're able to leave your current position and go into something else. Regardless of how much you buy into it, right? And I believe in that instance, there is the GM as a shaman is, as a storyteller, is weaving that narrative and is creating that world for you to be able to imagine it strong enough that you feel compelled to play in it, and you feel compelled to care about it, right? So I believe, because we pull from these things all the time, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be the lone warrior slaying the dragon? Like, that's awesome, and that's like beyond reality, but it's
almost archetypal.
It's almost archetypal, and of course, we have
wait, what's an archetype? What I'm kidding, go ahead. I
was gonna it's like shit brain.
That's my fault.
No. It's you can play, like, you can approach role playing in any kind of way, right? The ultimate kind of agency is you give your players the player's handbook in D&D's case, or you give them the character creation, and there's always more than one option. It's never just, you play John Swordman and you are here to destroy the enemy or to kill goblins or whatever. There's always, well, I find good role-playing games anyway will have a variety of options. I'm sure if you dig somewhere, you could find a game that has just one class. But even if you look at the Game of Thrones TTRPG, because yes, there is one, there's classes in that. So you can make an archetype. You can be the sneaky rogue, or the strong knight, or the oath-bound paladin. You can be these things that, on the surface level, are incredibly cliche, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's contextual, right? But they are incredibly not very original, but they're very archetypal. Right.
The well-trod nature of them gives us an anchor on which to hang all the rest of the archetypal interactions, though, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you can build from that, and then you can make an interesting character from that. But you know, at your root, it's like, I'm the knight that's going to save the princess, or no, I'm the sorcerer that's going to do evil on the land, or of course the enemy is a lich, because it always is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it plays into those kind of narratives, right? Because when you're role playing, it's cooperative storytelling. So it's like you're, weaving an epic together. You're weaving a myth together around the table. You're creating your own shared sacred text around the table that then you pass on to others after and say, well, we did this, and people speak as if they were there, as if they were them doing those things. And they pass on the stories, like the disciples did with Jesus.
Oh yeah.
Well,
So,
it's part of that particular aspect is part of both the liminality of the activity, because you create it is at the table, it's a liminal space that's created by the players and the GM in order to experience this other world, the shared imagined space. And the going out and saying, hey, I've done this is what I did, this is what we did in the first person, is a part of kind of relating the ritual, because you were there and you did participate in it, and the ritual becomes a very key element to the evocation of the archetypes in the context of the game, which allows it to sort of escape its mundanity and achieve this mythically resonant state. Again, not always. It's not going to happen every game. In fact, I'd argue it probably happens in very, very few games. But the fact that possibility exists, the fact that this is what gives the games meaning, right? This is what gives the games meaning. It's because you can enter into this state. You can step to the table, sit down. You are now at a liminal space. You become someone else, which maybe is aspects of yourself. Maybe you aspire to be the hero. Maybe you aspire to be the sage. And so you practice this ritual to add those aspects of these archetypes to yourself for a time. And that's the process of individuation that Jung talks about, where where you achieve your true self by experiencing and adding these archetypal elements to who you are. And this includes things like the shadow, which are the darker side. And the shadow it's almost like a meta archetype, right? There's 4 kind of meta archetypes, right? There's the anima and the animus, which is the same thing. It's the same, that occupies the same space. There's the self, which is the whole self. So that is what you're trying to achieve. That's what you're trying to make whole. There's the shadow, which is an element that adds darkness to all of the other archetypes in different ways. And then there is the persona, which are the masks that you wear, be it in your workplace, you're a different person than you are at home, than you are with specific friends. Those are quite literally, those are the different player characters that you assume. So the player characters as archetypes are thereby the persona. But it's and so these are sort of like, these are the lines that I'm trying to draw. These are the connections that I'm trying to make in order to, because Stochastic Agency, Brian once asked me, well, he's not the only one. But when he asked it in such a way, why do these matter? Why do you keep playing these games, right? Why is it TTRPGs? Why, when you can spend your time in 2025 doing any number of time waster activities, why is it that you choose role-playing games? And so I wanted to answer that question. And that's where this sort of started. And like I said, I was kind of just reading some other material at the time, but this is how it struck me. I was like, well, here's an answer to the question. The answer is, this is why they're meaningful, right? Because they're meaningful because they are myth in practice, at least limitedly.
There's a paper that actually one of my fellow PhD student that they mentioned it in a PhD meeting we had at the start of the year, and I can't find it. It's really annoying me because there's a paper that talks about it's the 9 types of characters players make, and it summarizes it made a grid of the types of player characters people make at the table.
A 9-square grid. Where have we seen that before?
And one of them is like, it says players will make characters when they're like newer to role play, will make characters that are similar to themselves, or they take a personality trait from themselves and then build on it to make their character, or they'll make a character that is the opposite of what they are, or they'll make a character that can do things that they can't do. And it's all, there's some psychological backing behind why people do different things. But there was a grid. There was a grid that referenced all the different types, and I'm trying to dig it out because it's really useful. It came to my mind when you were talking earlier, and I was like, ooh, ADHD activation button. But there's definitely a link between like coming to a table and stepping into that, and what kind of characters or what kind of experiences people want, right? Because isn't that why people play role-playing games? Because it's a truly unique experience every week, right? Like it doesn't have, or it's meaningful play isn't as powerful as video games. Loaded comment that. Potentially stronger because TTRPGs are more interpersonal. It's more interpersonal experience. Because you craft that world.
Yeah, I think that while video games can be a social experience,
because you can play Baldur's Gate, right?
Role-playing games are by default a social experience.
Yes.
In most cases, yeah.
Yeah. unless your GM's an asshole.
Well, or unless you're playing a
GM,
unless you're playing a solo RPG. But here, I want to ask, or actually set up something. I like to, as you may have noticed, especially you, Bacon, when we've talked before, I tend to like to define terms before we dive into the terms too much further. And I'd like to talk about what the actual definition of myth is first. The actual word myth, what is it defined as? Okay. And because pretty much everything everybody's said so far, I agree with.
Okay.
Yet I think in your base claim, you're wrong, Bacon. As we've talked about before. Yes, we've talked about it in private a little bit before. Because a myth, specifically a myth, is it's like a story that is used to provide context or definition to a phenomenon that has an unknown cause, let's say.
Well, there's five
where does lightning come from?
The Jungian myth. There's the expression of the collective unconscious, symbolic representation, myth as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. So it's not just it invokes the collective unconscious, it's that it's bridging the gap between the unconscious and the conscious. There's psychological and spiritual function, and they are timeless and universal. So those are the five qualities as I've been able to distill them from Jung, but he's not the only one with a definition.
I'm talking less about myth in the Jungian psychological term and more the way that myth is used culturally and throughout history, right? So the purpose of a myth is either to explain an unknown phenomenon, like where does lightning come from? Oh, well, it's Thor. He's casting Mjolnir down to the earth, or whatever. Or it is designed to provide a justification for a moral or societal, like tradition, or things like taboos or what have you.
So there's a lot of, and I haven't addressed this in any of my videos yet, there's a lot of perceived, whether valid or erroneous, there's a lot of perceived crossover between a legend and a myth.
Well, okay, I wanted to touch on
what people will call myth is actually legend. However, that doesn't mean that legends aren't mythic. That it's a very convoluted relationship.
Well, legends, I wanted to touch on that too, because legends typically relate to like of course there are like legends tend to become myth over time, right? Because legends are typically centered around a particular event or figure.
They can become myths over time, yes.
And they can become myths over time. So like King Arthur is a legend, but so many aspects of it are now so lost in time and are so ingrained in the culture they have become myths as well.
They have, but the Arthurian legends started off as collective legends. There are French tellings, there are British tellings, there are it's not just a singular story, and so it's generally relationship. It's generally if you want to take like Paul Bunyan, right, which I think is it's a very specific legend that's come out of a very singular culture, that being North American United States. That's not a myth. It's a legend.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
because it has not ascended
only about the one person.
Collectively.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump in because I think
go for it.
This is why I wanted to differentiate between myth and mythic.
Right.
Because I think, now I might be wrong, Bacon, but I think what you're actually getting to is a mythicness about TTRPG, in that playing them creates the same.
Oh no!
And just as she dares to speak the sacred text, she gets smitten
right in the middle of
I promise I was not the one that pushed mute or I didn't push the button.
And I can understand. I think I know where Jax was starting to go with it, because again, I think we're on the same wavelength, and I was very anticipating.
I'll wait for them to come back. Oh, here we go.
I think
you there.
Hey,
welcome back from the afterlife.
So weird. My camera just crapped out all of a sudden.
That's all right.
All right. So yes, a mythicness about games, in the same way that and the reason I've been waiting is because I've been reading a little bit. In the same way, I think that it applies to cinema. That's where I'm
okay. I can't wait. I was actually going to start off by asking you what Brackage says about myth and whatnot, but please take the floor.
So I did look. He doesn't speak too specifically in what I could find. There's so much writing. There's so much to find too specifically in what I was able to look at about myth. But this guy P. Adam Stitney, who I've sent you a copy of one of his books from Internet Archive, does and uses this term mythopoetic, and sometimes mythopoeic, and mythic to describe, in particular, a very certain type of film, notably the trance film, which I think would speak to your argument about shamanism. And what it is, it's really focusing on what I would describe as a sensory experience in cinema. And I don't mean that necessarily like 4D cinema, like you go to Disney World and you see the 4D.
And they squirt water on you.
That's not the kind of sensory experience. I mean in cinematic terms, a film that is less concerned with narrative, is more concerned with the resonant feelings and emotions and ultimately the experience of watching it, which is exactly what I think you're arguing.
Yes, that is what I'm arguing. And I think that it's I apologies for interrupting here.
No, good.
But I saw Crispy is in the chat here, so I wanted to sort of kind of stick this in. I think that, yes, that's what I'm arguing it for. It's the sensory experience. And I think that, funny enough, the 4D style of role play gets you closer to what I'm proposing, because I don't propose, much like mythic cinema or mythicness in cinema. I'm not proposing a set narrative, and I'm not it's not. There are games that can be played in that way. But I think the games that are going to have higher mythic resonance are going to be the ones that focus on becoming someone else, reaching up and pulling down an archetype and applying that archetype to your character and leaving the table and thereby applying it to yourself. So it's that, and I'll call that a sensory experience for the sake of the discussion. But I think that's really what I'm getting at here, or that's what I'm trying to get at. I don't know if I'm successful or not, but we'll see. Is that
Bleed Fairy?
Say again?
Bleed Fairy?
I didn't.
I am entirely unprepared to get into that at the moment.
But isn't that
Bleed?
Entirely unprepared.
But
I couldn't make that out. What was that?
But is that not just what you said? Like, is that not?
It's so. Here's the thing. I wish I had a picture of Marvel's The Thing to show you. Here's the thing. I am unprepared to discuss that at this time.
To discuss what exactly? I missed
Bleed Fairy.
Bleed.
Bleed.
Yeah.
Bleed. Right. Yes.
There's a lot more I need to do in the reading in order to be able to approach it. I have at least done some scanning, right?
Yeah.
And I don't. Well, I'm unprepared to talk about it here.
Okay, because the way, because what you just said to me, or what I just heard was, you want players to be so immersed, but they become their character. That's what I heard. You want them to be so immersed, but they're able to say, "I am a heroic knight."
Insofar as they're able to, I mean, there are still layers of separation here, right? You're still reality. You're still just a dude sitting at a table or sitting in front of a computer screen. Like that's. That's going to happen. That is the reality of the situation. But insofar as you're able to get as close as possible, that is what you're hearing. Yes.
Can I share an anecdotal story?
Please.
So,
well, hold on though. I'm sorry.
No.
Were you finished, Jax? Is it?
My apologies.
Did I confirm or no? It's okay, Ben. I just want to make sure that we're hitting everything.
No, you're right.
Oh
Jax,
yeah, no. I think I did finish. I think it's because I think that's where it's maybe getting caught up, right? Is this idea of like, because Sable's right, like a myth has like a pretty culturally fixed connotation.
They can,
right? I just mean the word myth. I just mean the word.
Oh yes,
myth,
okay, yes.
Yeah, right. I think
which is why I'm sort of urging more towards mythic personally.
Right.
Yeah, but
I mean, there does have to be a separation that takes place. It's going to be like prying things apart that really don't want to be separated.
Remember, just to interject real quick, like one sentence from one of our previous our conversations, Bacon. Let's make a distinction between myth and epic, because a lot of the times I think what people think of when they think of myth is epic storytelling, right? The knights riding out to slay the dragon, yada yada.
Yes,
and that can be myth, but it
can
doesn't have to be.
But to reinforce that point, the most pure form in the Jungian tradition, and this is stated by Marie-Louise von Franz, the purest form of myth is found in fairy tale. Yeah. Not over the top, world-ending threats, not dragon slaying. Well, sometimes dragon slaying, but the most pure form of myth and archetypes and collective unconscious can be found in fairy tales. And so that I feel like that supports the point that you're making pretty well. So I think that separating epic from myth is necessary here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just I think that that's very much on line with what Jax is saying too.
I agree.
I understand it correctly.
Ben, I apologize.
Ben, sorry
for holding
no. So I've had an instance where, for a moment, I was my character, and I had an experience where I felt that, and we had to pause the game, because at this moment I didn't know what to do. I was actually stunned. My brain had to reboot. So we're playing Only War, and we're destroying a Tyranid ship, and we're inside it, and we're doing a do or die mission. And at the time, I just separated from my girlfriend, long-term girlfriend. So I was going through the whole like abandonment issues stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is relevant because this enabled this to happen. It enabled the immersion to hit that I was able to kind of slip into that because of that. So my character, I'd built into frenzy so I could go into melee, but I also had really bad willpower. So it was really hard for me to snap out of frenzy. But I was a melee fighter, so I weaponized it to do my attacks.
Mm-hmm.
We're right at the end of the mission, and 3 turns in a row, I fail to snap out of it. And we only have a finite amount of time to leave the ship, and this was the last round. And one of the players grabbed my character and said, "Pull your shit together, or we're leaving you behind." And in that moment, I genuinely felt like I was going to be abandoned. And I didn't know how to respond to that. And they thought at first I was just role-playing, but I wasn't, because I felt that. And I didn't know what to say. I was genuinely like struck by that, to the point where the player said, are you good? And I was like, I don't know. That's the only thing I could say, and it took me a minute to kind of pull out of that. So I've had a lived experience like that. So it's 1,000% possible, but it's not a sustainable thing, right? Because it relies on the players being immersed enough at the table and being immersed by the shaman to
and this is why I
sounds like Zen.
This is why I lean incredibly on the 4D application of role playing, because in that particular play style, there is an expectation of I'm not going to say zero. That zero is likely the ideal, right? Zero table talk. You don't want to be out of character at the table at all. And I, in the conversation that I had with Crispy, I think it was that conversation, he went on to say that it is not an easy thing to maintain that level of in-character-ness for such an extended period of time. It becomes exhausting.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I think that there is a commitment that needs to be made to the table and to yourself in order to bring it to the place where you can experience these things, for sure.
And not every player is capable of doing that, because, well, not that that's a negative thing, but
no, I agree. It's like a Fantasia. Not everyone can imagine an apple in their head.
Everyone comes to play for different reasons, right? You know, you have players that come to D&D to win, right? That they just want to fight stuff and have fun killing stuff. Right? It's a game, right? But then you have people that want to role play, and they want to feel, and they want to have emotional stories. And I found through my research that you know, your players only give a crap if they give a crap, and they have to buy into the story. And I think to help push the myth, to help push that experience, having more tools at your disposal to create ambience immediately evokes an emotional response, because you're telling your players how to feel. So if you're on a map and you have made the map dark and you play spooky music, your brain goes, oh yeah, I should be afraid now, because the music and tone is telling you how to feel. Or if you buy props, so every time I run Alien at my house, I buy people ID badges, and it just does. We see them first, yeah.
I see them. In fact, I'm actually gonna address your comment momentarily, but I'm reading all of them.
And it's having props, or having stuff on the table, doing ambient lighting. Or I actually read that a good thing to do for your players to help build this to help cross this bridge is have your players aid in the setup of the table, or meet them at the door in costume and greet them in role play. So that way, subconsciously, when they come into the environment, they're beginning to start thinking about, oh, okay, this is what we're doing today. This is how we're doing it. And having, you know, food that is thematic. In fact, actually, the Colonial Marines rulebook has instructions for making that like crappy starch bread stuff they eat at the start of the film. It's got a recipe in it, so you can make it for your players.
That's pretty cool.
That can add can really add to the experience. There's a TTRPG called Nibiru, which is all about reclaiming lost memories and Planet X and et cetera, but it's all about living in the dark and never seeing the sun. And one of the things the book suggests is playing it in a dark room.
10 candles.
10 candles. Yep, 10 fucking.
I think that there's definitely a lot there with regard to immersion and
Well,
myth.
that's very much that's very much the ritualistic aspect, right?
Well, for sure.
That's like the shaman setting up the ritual, setting up the environment.
Yes, it is it's all a part of creation of the liminal space, and I think that it's well, first of all, it's essential. I think that's very clear. At least my opinion on it is clear. And I think that there's quite a bit here. Now, I've only ever in my in the current videos that have been released, I have only ever addressed this very in very short, very curt statements about, you know, the shaman or the GM as the shaman creates the liminal space. The table is the liminal space. The shared imagined space is kind of a liminal space, but I haven't actually drilled down on it. And that's because there's a lot here, right? Like there's a lot here with regard to what you can do. Like immersion doesn't have to just be in your head. Immersion can be, like you said, cooking a special meal before players sit down at the table. Immersion can be, and I will bring this example up ad infinitum because I think it's fantastic. TPR, Sable Phoenix exposed me to a game called Spire the City Must Fall and Heart the City Beneath, or maybe it was, I can't remember. I think it was you. But there are mechanics in that game that incorporate out of play situations. For example, I can get up from the table and go and get a glass of water. And when I get up from a table and go and get that glass of water, my character can be suffering from a specific condition that has them enter a fugue state. So what happens is when I get up, I am the consciousness of my character. I get up and I leave. Everyone else around the table goes, okay, this is what Bacon does while he's up getting a drink of water. And I come back and sit down, and these characters have all experienced my fugue state in the game, and I haven't because I wasn't there. I think that's just incredibly, it's ingenious. It's also evocative, and it's a way of better bridging the gap between the conscious and the unconscious, the imagined and the real. It's just, so those sorts of things I think are, and especially with the ritual, right? So the ritual aspects are very important. Where you play, what the expectation is, the time that you set to play, how many people are going to be there, how long are we going to play for, the instruments involved, pencils, pens, paper, books, like these are all ritual items that you bring to, and I want to just really quickly address Drudenfuss here. I agree that it's important to discuss. I am not prepared to discuss it. So I don't want you to think that I was poo-pooing the topic as it came up. Far from it. I do plan on addressing it, just I am not capable of addressing it with the fullness that I feel is necessary. So because there are other things to consider outside of Bleed that will contribute to the conversation, and I'm just not prepared. I'm just not prepared for that conversation yet.
I would love to come to that talk.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll probably have you all here.
That is an intrinsic aspect of this discussion for sure. That I think that going towards more like Ben's experience, that approaches things like Zen, which I've talked with Bacon about a little bit before, and I don't know if anybody has experienced Zen before in this discussion here besides myself, but I've done sounds like yeah, I've been there too. We've talked about that. But that idea of getting to that singular moment where time seems to stop and it both everything happens all at once, and it takes an infinite amount of time to occur, kind of a thing, both at the same time. or ego death. If you're going through, say, a type of ritual that includes chemical enhancements, shall we say.
I was going to say, all your players come on the table to play D&D and get high on LSD.
Right? It's like, hey, we're going to have an ayahuasca D&D section.
We're all going to forget what happened. The only one who doesn't take drugs is the GM.
Exactly. But I mean,
that would be an absolute nightmare. I think.
There is a parallel, though, right? I mean, this is
there is definitely a parallel. And I've said as much. That typically in ritual there can be. It doesn't have to be present, but there can be the presence of the inducement of an altered state. But that is present in the tabletop role-playing game.
Yeah.
So long as you're able to achieve that closeness with the character that you are, right? That as indistinguishable as you're able to get. You're still, again, you're still just someone sitting around a table or in front of a computer. That's still reality.
And here's where I think you're actually doing. I do not agree that RPGs in practice are myths per se, even though they can be mythic. I do agree that RPGs, your point about that this entire discussion that you came up with on your channel, that the point about an RPG being a ritual is 100% accurate. In every application, regardless of whether or not there is the achievement of transcendent identification with your character, because there are rituals which are specifically meant to be humorous, right?
Yeah.
There are rituals that have nothing to do with achieving a different altered state of consciousness or having some kind of a deep insight or learning a lesson. There are rituals that are just meant to be fun. There are rituals that are meant to induce laughter. So just because you don't get that epic level of high quality or something that it has quote unquote deep meaning or what have you, doesn't mean you aren't engaging in a ritual. The activity is still a ritualistic activity.
I think that there's a very important difference to call out here. There is a difference between ritual and ritualized action, right? The difference is there's some sort of it's not spiritual, right? There's some sort of psychological component, which may very well be spiritual. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying it's not always spiritual. But there's some sort of psychological component to ritual, right? Like, let's take graduation, for example. Graduating from a university or from high school, that's a ritual action, right? But if you're not like reaching out and contacting the psyche and pulling archetypes down with you and experiencing it as the crossing of the threshold that it actually is, right? If you're just there with your family and you're celebrating, you're having a good time, that's a ritualized action. If you are in the moment sitting amongst your classmates right before you get called up and you are experiencing that psychological crossing of the threshold, then it becomes a ritual. I do think that there are some rituals that are intended to be humorous. And I think, it really all depends on the purpose of the ritual, right? Like you can certainly reach out beyond yourself and experience, right, the cosmic comedian, right? If that's the intention of the ritual. But there is definitively a difference between a ritualized action and an actual ritual. The ritual has this psychological component. There's an experiential piece that's present in a ritual.
Yes, 100%.
I think TTRPGs achieve.
Yes, I agree, and that's 100% I would agree with. But at the same time, it does not necessarily induce, nor does it require, an alteration of consciousness or a change of perspective. It can be a very introspective experience.
I agree. It doesn't. Yeah, that is not a ritual.
There are plenty of rituals.
No, myths don't require that, though.
Yeah, it's not. So it's
right.
Not,
myth, but yeah, no, I completely agree with that too.
Yes, I also agree with that. It can be a component of, but I don't think is necessarily a requirement of.
I agree with Fuzz.
This year?
Yeah.
In my opinion, rituals are never about spirituality, since I don't believe in anything spiritual. In my opinion, it's just the need of the psyche for. That's okay. That's totally cool.
Fine.
Which is why I didn't want to say spiritual, because I think that saying psychological, there's a psychological component. I think is just a better expression.
I think it could be actually. I believe with the sentiment in general, because you don't have to per se be like religious or not to have an experience like that.
Agree.
Because it's psychological, right? You're putting yourself in a
it's like constructive or destructive interference, so to speak.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So constructive interference means you're enhancing a particular waveform, or say inside your brain, to such an extent that it becomes dominant, and that's all you experience for that period of time.
Myth is a constituent of the human condition, not the human condition, but. So it's not the human condition, but you also have to be a practicing Catholic. It is just a constituent of the human experience. You do not have to be spiritual to engage in myth. I didn't mean to come across that way. If I did, which is why that's why I changed my language mid statement, because I wanted to make sure I was being clear.
Also, there's a difference between spiritual and religious too, which is
there is a difference.
The bouncing point I wanted to go from that is would being religious make it easier, or give a because if you are engaging in that kind of psychological activity, like praying more often, you might find it easier to enter that kind of space. Can you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, for sure. That's the root. That's kind of the root of religions in the first place, right?
Yeah, I think that there's friction here, though, and I think that there's friction because I think that we should likely allow it to be self-assessed, because I don't want to tell the religious person what they're thinking or feeling, just like I don't want them telling me what I'm thinking or feeling.
Yeah.
And so I'm perfectly content to allow the self-assessment. However, as you've asked the question, I would say that I think so, yes.
I would agree.
There is some degree of religiosity or spirituality that will just by default predispose you toward this type of I mean, if
enhanced experience,
like Jesus Christ is an archetype, right?
Mm-hmm.
The biblical story is an archetype. It's an archetypal. It has archetypal themes, archetypal situations, and the reason that I say Jesus Christ is an archetype is because, and I think it's Hillman that says this, but it might be one of the others, Christ effectively becomes the high priest for everyone, right, in the story. So if you subscribe to Christianity through whatever denomination you want to subscribe to it through, that is the idea. That's the concept. That is the undiluted concept of a high priest, right? It's, he's also the Son of God. He's so there's a lot there, right? And I think that if you are going to believe in a faith, it doesn't just have to be Christianity. I keep bringing that up because that's the one that I'm most familiar with as an American, and as a former Christian. I think that it definitely does predispose you toward this sort of mythic thinking.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like right here, right?
Yeah.
Dying, resurrecting deity, which is all over the place in antiquity.
Oh yeah, Osiris and Isis, etc.
Imagine so you're saying how imagine you playing a game of D&D, and the game of D&D is set in a tavern, and let's just, for the sake of, I don't know if this is what's the word, shoehorning or strawmanning. Let's say the session involves your characters getting drunk at a tavern, so you decide to run the session in a bar and drink.
Say that again. You decide to run the session at a bar.
At a bar. So you buy alcohol
Right.
You go to a bar and you do the session at a pub or a bar or wherever, and you do the session in that environment. It
Yeah.
helps create, because not always are you gonna have the immersion. Like it's the 4D thing. It's the that's it. That's where my brain was going. Because if you situate yourself in a real environment that is mimicking or is actually the thing you're pretending to be in, it helps bring that psychological barrier down and allows you to more easily immerse, and it pulls you away from being around a table, and it I mean I could say anything but D&D. I mean, I'm not a big fan of D&D myself, but I'm just using it as the default TTRPG. Okay, let's say we're playing Dark Heresy and we decide to go execute a bunch of people because we don't believe in our god. There we go. Is that a worse example? But like, putting yourself in, actually physically in an environment that is where you're supposed to be playing, helps bring that psychological barrier down, and perhaps allows the myth to feel and happen more readily as well. Oh yeah, Jax, I forgot about that. Yeah.
This is actually a very funny comment. And there, I thought the discussion hit rock bottom when Young was mentioned, but D&D, of course, is way worse. Very funny.
It depends on what version of D&D you're talking about.
Yeah, and I look, if D&D is your thing, D&D is your thing. I will play 5e. I will play because, and as I've said before, Jax, during other oh hey, thanks for showing up. I've said before that it's really just a matter of playing with people at the table, right? So if people want to play 5e, I'll play 5e. I have no problem.
There's a big difference.
If you ask me my opinion, I'll give you my opinion, but I'll still play it.
Like, okay.
There's a big difference between system and setting, as I've mentioned before.
So you all come around to play Alien, and I'll dress up as a xenomorph, and we'll go from there, right? Right.
I would love to see that.
I am really tempted to
dress
get
up
my
and on
doctorate,
camera, right? You're not just going to tell me that you're dressed up and not show yourself.
That would actually be lame. The funniest video, just to see it more.
Yeah. When your character dies, you go home. But like having, so I feel it's obviously that there is a distinction between, like, our brain is able to simultaneously understand and not understand when a game is real, right? And
yes,
and we
suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, we can differentiate between something that is symbolic and something that is trying to think of the word.
Different parts of the brain. Yeah.
It's why we can feel emotional when we watch film. And I feel like because the players need to also enjoy the game as well, and it's definitely not going to be possible for everyone to enter that state. It's definitely a lot of work and effort. And I was it Sable or Bacon? One of you two said it earlier, but there's no way it's going to happen for the entire session, or it's very hard to expect students players.
You can't expect students to pay attention for
exactly.
I don't want to be at work at the moment.
What, huh?
I went to my brain onto autopilot. It's hard to expect players to maintain that level of character for the entire session, and if someone can do that, it's why actors method act, because it can help those individuals become that character and become the myth of the thing they are trying to portray, because acting is just a form of role playing, right? It's all the same thing on paper. And some actors, they have interviews where a character would really stay with them, or part of their life would alter or change because they have become that character, right? The voice actor for Asterion in Baldur's Gate, he has kept Asterian's laugh.
Yep, I actually just watched that interview.
Yeah, right. And it's like you're taking these things and you're bringing it into your life, right? And vice versa. When you're playing the game, you get your life, you put it in a little box and go, nah, I'm badass Greek warrior for the next 4 hours, and you can enter that space, right? But having those 4-dimensional objects, I'm a very firm believer in having extra stuff to immerse with. Audio, sound effects, smell is really powerful. If your characters are in an environment where there's food, or they're in a bakery, just put some food in the oven, and it's going to help. I mean, until it burns, but it's going to help. Yeah, no, it is a whole can of worms for us. Yeah, you're right. Itching the surface of it. Oh yeah, I bet you could. It's having props or having something ultimately it makes the experience more interpersonal, and when you make something more interpersonal, it allows players to have better enjoyment and better satisfaction. And when players are having fun and when they're enjoying what they're doing and they really are bought into the setting, then you can push them to pull that archetype and to become a hero, right? One of the things I like to do with my games is I'll do like a break where we'll do something else for a few weeks, maybe like it'd be 1-shot or a 2-shot, but it all exists within the same game. So it's the same game system, but a different little thing. In those interludes, I will thrust upon players roles that they don't normally do, and I do this to help them kind of come out their shell a little bit more, and B, it allows them to perhaps pull from things they might not otherwise be able to with their current characters. And it allows players to, have a wider experience of stuff to pull from, to kind of see where they get enjoyment from. Because if you can nail that, and if you can really get the maximum amount of satisfaction from something, and what your players to feel satisfied, they're more likely to have that barrier, that mental barrier, get broken down. But then you can roll all of this back to the hierarchy of needs, right? Because if the players don't have that at the table, then they're going to be distracted before you even begin play anyway. So you have to make sure that as part of the ritual, the players are happy, they are well, they're fed, and that they are ready to begin the act of becoming a role, rather than, like, I wouldn't say role playing, but becoming a role, becoming someone else, like transcending at the table, right? They're willing to do that as well, because if they don't want to, I mean, it's very easy for someone to just sit there, pushing their fingers together and being like, I wish this was Pathfinder, and you've lost them for the last 3 hours.
That's kind of like analogous to the purging before the ritual starts, kind of a thing, right? Like, you have to spend the week ahead up to your ayahuasca not eating any meat, not eating any sugar, yada yada. Drinking only water, all the stuff. It's like it's analogous to that.
And it's like there's methods that GMs can use to pull players immediately, right? Starting the game with like a really in-depth, thrilling narrative, or speaking in a tone that grabs people's attention, or using smells. I'm a big fan of using smells. I think using smells, tastes, and sights around a table can really help pull people into that immersive realm, and to break the psychological barriers, to allow not only better role play but more fun, to allow them to become what they've made as well. I don't know if I'm hitting the right thing here, because it's making me the topic is making me think a lot. I'm having to actually kind of.
Well, that wasn't the goal.
But doing stream of consciousness like this kind of thing is part of the reason we talk like this in the first place. We've all done it.
Yeah. It's
making people think was not the goal. Stop it.
Stop being a free thinker. No, obey, consume.
So I just got word behind the scenes that Jax has to go or may have to go.
I think I probably should. Yeah.
Okay. And I expected this one to sort of be shorter. I think there's obviously and clearly more to discuss, but I'd prefer to do it with all of us here. So now might be a good time to end, and we can come back at a later time, reschedule, and sort of resume, I guess, if that's okay with the two of you.
That's fine with me, yeah.
All right, cool.
Sorry to call it short, guys.
No, you're totally fine. Like I said, I expected it to be a shorter one. I was wrong. My time estimation is
there's a lot to unpack here, man.
Yeah, I will tell people that I will have something to them. Jax, you are so well familiar with this. I'll have it to you by the weekend. And then 3 months later, you're asking me for the thing that I said I would have in 2 days. But we can talk about this later. I thank you all for coming. I thank everyone in chat for showing up and hanging out and listening in. There will be more on this. There will be more, there will be more of my solo stuff coming out as well as group conversations. I think I'm probably going to try to include other people as well. I might try to get Runeslinger in on this. He and I have kind of discussed that behind the scenes. I might try to get Crispy in on this if he's interested, but we'll see what all shakes loose. But thank you all. And I will talk to you soon. Later.
Definitely soon. Definitely soon.
Hopefully soon.